The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when the doorbell rang, not the gentle kind of rain that taps politely on windows and makes you want to curl up with a book and a blanket. No, this was the violent, angry kind, the kind that hammers against the roof like 1,000 fists demanding entry, that turns the streets into rivers and the world outside into a blur of black water and darker shadows. I was in my reading chair in the living room, the one Arthur bought me for our 40th anniversary, the one I can't bring myself to replace, even though the left armrest is worn down to the bare fabric from decades of my hand resting there. I had been reading the same page of my mystery novel for 20 minutes, without absorbing a single word. The storm had my attention more than any fictional murder ever could. When you've lived alone for as long as I have, 4 years now since Arthur passed, you develop a different relationship with silence and sound. Every creak becomes a question. Every unexpected noise is a puzzle your mind immediately tries to solve. Is it the old pipes, the settling foundation, the oak tree branch that hangs too close to the guest bedroom window? Or is it something else? The doorbell cut through the storm's roar like a knife through silk. I set my book down on the side table, my reading glasses perched on top of it, and checked my watch. 9:47, late for visitors, especially on a night like this. My heart rate picked up just a fraction. Not panic, not yet. Just that heightened awareness that comes from being a woman alone in a large house when unexpected things happen after dark. I've lived in this house for 36 years. I raised 2 children here. I buried one husband from here. I've replaced the water heater twice, painted every room at least once, and I know every sound this structure makes. The doorbell doesn't ring unless someone presses it. I stood slowly. At 72, you learn to stand. Slowly, and moved toward the front door. The foyer was dark, except for the lamp I keep on the console table, the one with the Tiffany-style shade that casts amber patterns on the walls. Through the frosted glass panels on either side of the door, I could see a silhouette. Male, tall, wearing something with a hood. My hand went to the deadbolt, then hesitated. I've read the news. I know what happens to women who open their doors without asking questions first. "Who is it?" I called out, keeping my voice steady and firm. Arthur always said I had a voice that could command a room when I wanted it to. "It's late." "Mum," the voice was muffled through the door, barely audible over the storm. "Mum, it's me. I forgot my key." My son, Jason. My baby boy who's now 43 years old with grey starting to pepper his temples and a demanding job as a senior architect at a firm downtown that keeps him working ridiculous hours. Relief flooded through me, warm and immediate. I flipped the deadbolt, turned the handle, and pulled open the heavy oak door. The wind rushed in first, bringing sheets of rain with it, soaking the doormat and the first foot of my hardwood floor. Then he stepped into the light. It was Jason. Same height, just over 6 feet. Same broad shoulders he inherited from his father's side of the family. Same dark blue hoodie he'd been wearing the last time he stopped by, 3 days ago, to fix my garbage disposal. The hood was pulled up over his head, casting his face in shadow, but I could see his jaw, his chin, the familiar slope of his neck. "Jesus, Mum, thanks," he muttered, his voice rough and tired. He was shivering, or at least his shoulders were shaking in that way people do when they've been out in the cold and wet too long. "Sorry to bother you so late. Lost my keys at the office. Bus was late. This rain is insane." He brushed past me before I could respond, water dripping from his jacket onto my floor, leaving a trail of muddy boot prints on the hardwood. Arthur and I had refinished ourselves 20 years ago. He headed straight down the hallway toward the kitchen without looking back. "Jason, honey, you're soaking wet," I called after him, closing the door against the storm and re-engaging the deadbolt out of habit. "Let me get you a towel, and take off those boots before you—" But he was already in the kitchen. I could hear the refrigerator door opening, the sound of bottles and containers being moved around. I stood in the foyer for a moment, water pooling around my slippers, and felt something small and cold whisper at the base of my spine. Something wasn't quite right. But mothers are used to overriding those whispers, aren't they? We're trained from the moment we give birth to push past our own discomfort, our own needs, our own instincts, if they conflict with taking care of our children. He was cold, he was wet, he was hungry. Of course he'd go straight to the kitchen. He'd been doing that since he was 6 years old, coming home from school and raiding the fridge before even dropping his backpack. I grabbed the small towel we keep on the hook by the door for wiping rain off coats and hands, and followed the trail of water and mud down my hallway. The house felt different tonight, bigger, somehow. The distance between the foyer and the kitchen seemed to stretch longer than usual, and the amber light from the lamps scattered throughout the first floor seemed dimmer, like they were struggling to push back the darkness that pressed against every window. Or maybe that was just my imagination, flavored by the storm and the hour and the mystery novel I'd been failing to read about a woman who opened her door to the wrong person and paid for it with her life. When I reached the kitchen, he was bent over, his upper body disappearing into the refrigerator. The light from inside the fridge cast a cold blue glow across the black and white checkered tile floor that I'd mopped just this morning. His hood was still up, his shoulders still shaking slightly. "Jason, honey, here's a—" I stopped. He was eating, not taking out food to prepare it, not grabbing a drink and closing the fridge. He was standing there, hunched over, tearing into a container of leftover rotisserie chicken with his bare hands, stuffing meat into his mouth with a desperation that made my stomach clench. "Jason?" He didn't respond, just kept eating. I could hear the sounds now, wet, tearing sounds, chewing, almost frantic. "Jason, are you all right?" I took a step closer, the towel still in my hand. That's when I noticed the boots. He was still wearing his boots, heavy work boots, the kind with thick treads, and they were covered, absolutely caked, in mud, dark mud that was now smeared across my clean kitchen floor in thick tracks, mud that was still dripping in clumps from the soles. My son never wears his shoes in the house, ever. It's been one of my rules since he was a child. Arthur was relaxed about most things, but I insisted on that one. Shoes off at the door, always. And Jason had internalized it so completely that even now, as an adult visiting his elderly mother, he'd sit on the porch in a snowstorm to unlace his boots rather than track so much as a speck of dirt across my threshold. And these weren't just dirty. They were filthy, like he'd been walking through a marsh or digging in the woods. The cold whisper at the base of my spine turned into a scream, but I didn't move. I didn't run, because I've lived 72 years on this earth, and I've learned that the moment you show fear, the moment you show that you've noticed something wrong, you lose every advantage you might have had. So I stood there, in my own kitchen, watching this man who looked like my son, who sounded enough like my son, who had walked into my house like he owned the place, devour my leftovers like an animal that hadn't eaten in days. "Jason, sweetheart, you must be starving," I said, keeping my voice light, motherly, concerned. "Let me make you something hot. How about some soup? I have that minestrone you love." He paused. His shoulders stopped shaking for just a moment. Then he straightened up, pulling back from the refrigerator, and turned to look at me. And that's when my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet kitchen, a text notification. The table was only 6 feet away from where I stood, the phone lying face up next to the placemat where I'd eaten my own dinner hours ago. I glanced at it reflexively, the way we all do now, trained by 1,000 incoming messages to look immediately whenever our devices demand our attention. The screen was lit up. I could see the preview from where I stood. Jason. Mobile. "Mum, I'm stuck at the station. I lost my keys. Don't open the door for anyone. Are you home? Please respond." The world tilted. Everything slowed down. The sound of the rain against the windows, the hum of the refrigerator, the thundering of my own heartbeat in my ears. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my hands go cold, felt every survival instinct I'd ever possessed scream at me to run, to scream, to do something, anything, but I didn't. I lifted my eyes from the phone to the man standing 8 feet away from me in my kitchen. He was still facing the refrigerator, his back partially to me, his face in shadow under that hood, but I could see his profile now in the light from the fridge. The jaw was right. The height was right. The build was right. But the text on my phone said my son was at the station, which meant the man in my kitchen, the man I'd let into my house 5 minutes ago, the man who was now between me and every exit except the back door that led to the yard and the storm, was not my son. Stop right there. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. I need you to really hear me. What would you do if the monster was already inside? If you had opened your door, welcomed it in, and only realized your mistake when it was too late to run, when screaming would only trigger the attack? If you want to know how I survived the impossible, hit subscribe and like right now. Pay close attention to every word I'm about to tell you, because this story might save your life. I'm going to explain exactly how I stayed alive when my only weapons were my mind and my ability to pretend I didn't know I was standing in a room with a predator. Let's continue. Time does strange things when you're terrified. Scientists call it tachypsychia, the apparent slowing of time during life-threatening situations. Your brain shifts into overdrive, processing information at an accelerated rate, making seconds feel like minutes. Every detail becomes hyper-real, crystalline, etched into your memory with the kind of clarity that normal moments never achieve. Standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone, I lived a lifetime in the space of 3 heartbeats. In the first heartbeat, my mind tried to explain it away. Maybe Jason had lost his phone. Maybe someone else was texting from his number. Maybe there was a mistake, a glitch, some rational explanation that would make the world make sense again. In the second heartbeat, I looked at the man's boots again, at the mud, at the way he stood, not quite like Jason stands, now that I was really looking. Jason has Arthur's posture, straight-backed from years of his mother reminding him not to slouch. This man was slightly hunched, tense, coiled. In the third heartbeat, I made my decision. I was not going to die in this kitchen. I've lived through too much to die in my own home, murdered by a stranger wearing my son's clothes. I survived raising 2 children on a teacher's salary, while Arthur worked 60-hour weeks to make his accounting firm. I survived breast cancer at 57. I survived burying the love of my life and learning to live alone in a house full of ghosts and memories. I sure as hell was going to survive this, but survival meant staying calm. It meant not letting him know that I knew, because if he realized I'd discovered his deception, what incentive would he have to keep pretending? What would stop him from attacking me right now, overpowering me, doing whatever terrible thing he'd come here to do? Nothing. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I smiled. I picked up my phone, glanced at the message with the kind of casual disinterest you show to spam notifications, and set it back down on the table without responding. Then I looked back at the man and smiled like he was my son, and everything was perfectly normal. You poor thing. You really are starving, aren't you? I said, my voice warm and maternal. I moved toward the stove, my body on autopilot, my mind racing at light speed beneath the calm surface. Let me put the kettle on. You look like you need something hot. How about tea? And I'll make you a proper sandwich. You're eating that chicken like you haven't had a meal in days. He had turned his head slightly when my phone buzzed, but now he turned back to the refrigerator. He grabbed the container of chicken again, still eating, but slower now, watching me from the corner of his eye. Testing me, or just hungry. Yeah, he said after a moment, his voice muffled. Yeah, tea sounds good. But it wasn't quite right. Jason's voice is higher, clearer. This voice was rougher, deeper, close enough to pass at a glance, especially through a door in a storm, but not exact, not when you were really listening. How had I missed it at the door? Because you weren't listening for differences, I told myself. You were listening for your son. Expectation is a powerful thing. We hear what we expect to hear. We see what we expect to see, until we don't. I filled the kettle with water from the tap, my hands remarkably steady considering my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I set it on the stove and turned on the burner, the blue flame whooshing to life with a soft click, click, click. The kettle would take 4 minutes to boil. 4 minutes to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I couldn't get to my phone without being obvious. I couldn't call 911. I couldn't text Jason back to warn him or tell him to call the police. The man was between me and the hallway that led to the front door. The only other exit was the back door, 10 feet behind me, which led out to the patio and the yard and the woods beyond. But it was locked. I'd locked it myself after taking out the trash before dinner, and the deadbolt made noise, a distinctive click-thunk that he would definitely hear if I tried to open it. Even if I could get it open silently, I'd have to run out into the storm, at night, with no phone, no car keys, nowhere to go except toward the neighbors' houses, which were quarter-mile away through woods and darkness. He was younger, stronger, faster. He would catch me before I got 20 feet. No, running was not an option. I needed to think. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Who was he? What did he want? Home invasion? But we weren't being robbed. At least not yet. He'd come in and gone straight to the kitchen. Straight to the food. Sexual assault? The thought made my stomach turn to ice. But again, he'd made no move toward me. He'd barely looked at me. Was he hiding? On the run from something? That made a horrible kind of sense. The desperate eating. The mud-caked boots like he'd been traveling through rough terrain. The hoodie pulled low to hide his face. Maybe he'd been watching the house. Maybe he knew Jason visited regularly. Maybe he'd planned this. Seen an opportunity to get in out of the storm, to find shelter and food in a house occupied by an elderly woman alone. Easy target. That's what I was supposed to be, wasn't it? An easy target. Elderly, female, alone, vulnerable. The kettle began to hiss softly as the water heated. "So," I said, opening the cabinet and taking down 2 mugs with hands that I forced to move slowly, calmly, normally. "How was work today? You said you were at the office?" He grunted, still eating. I couldn't see his face. "That new project keeping you busy? The one downtown? The mixed-use development?" Another grunt. "Yeah, busy." Wrong answer. Jason wasn't working on a mixed-use development downtown. He was working on a hospital expansion in the suburbs. I'd made that up. My son would have corrected me immediately, probably with affectionate exasperation at his mother getting the details wrong again. This man just agreed with me. The hissing from the kettle grew louder. I needed to test him more carefully. I needed to know for certain. Not that I had much doubt anymore, but I needed to be absolutely sure before I did anything that couldn't be undone. "Jason, honey," I said, reaching for the tea tin on the counter. My hand brushed against the knife block as I moved. 6 knives, different sizes, in wooden slots. The largest was a 10-inch chef's knife that Arthur had bought me for our 30th anniversary, German steel, sharp enough to slice through a tomato like butter. I could grab it right now. I could turn around and what? Stab him? Attack him? I'm 72 years old. I have arthritis in my left hip and my right shoulder. He could disarm me in seconds. And if I tried and failed, there would be no more pretending, no more strategy, just violence. No, not yet. There had to be another way. "Jason, did you remember to pick up your sister from the airport?" I asked casually, conversationally, as I dropped tea bags into both mugs. "I know she was flying in today. She must be exhausted after that long flight." I held my breath. Jason doesn't have a sister. He has a brother, Mark, who lives in Colorado with his wife and their 3 kids. Mark is 2 years older than Jason, works in software sales, and hasn't been home to visit in 8 months because his youngest started having seizures, and he's been dealing with doctors and specialists and the nightmare of pediatric epilepsy. Jason is an only son, with only a brother. If this was really Jason, he would immediately correct me. He'd probably make a joke about how I was getting forgetful in my old age, or ask if I was feeling okay, or remind me that Mark wasn't visiting, and neither was anyone else. The man at the refrigerator paused. The sound of chewing stopped. Then, yeah, she's fine. She got in okay." The kettle began to scream. My hand shook as I reached for it, just a tremor, and I forced it steady. I poured the boiling water into both mugs, watching the tea bags steep, the water turning golden brown. He had just confirmed it. This was not my son. This was a stranger in my house. A dangerous man who had been watching closely enough to know what Jason looked like, what he wore, how to mimic him well enough to fool a mother at a glance. A predator who had planned this, and I was alone with him. The steam from the mugs rose between us like a ghost, and behind it, I saw him finally turn to face me fully. He reached up and pushed back his hood, and I understood why it had worked, why I'd been fooled. He looked like Jason, not identical, not if you really studied him, not if you knew Jason's face as well as I did, but close enough. Same general features, same coloring, same build, maybe mid-30s instead of early 40s, and his face was harder, leaner, with lines around the mouth that spoke of hunger and violence instead of laughter and stress. But in the dark, through a frosted window, in the rain, with a hood covering half his face. Yes, I could see how I'd made the mistake. He smiled at me. It was Jason's smile. The same curve of the lips, the same flash of teeth. My baby's smile. The one I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The one that had charmed teachers and talked him out of trouble and lit up every room he entered. But the eyes, God, the eyes were empty, flat, cold, like looking into dirty ice at the bottom of a frozen pond. "Thanks, Mum," he said, and the smile widened. "You're the best. I want to stop here for a moment to tell you something important. In every true crime show, in every horror movie, in every dark fantasy we have about dangerous situations, there's always a moment where we, the audience, scream at the screen. Don't go in there. Don't talk to him. Run. Call the police. Do something." It's easy to make those judgments from safety, from distance, from the comfortable space of fiction. But when you're standing in that moment yourself, when the monster is real and it's in your kitchen, and it's wearing the face of someone you love, everything changes. Your brain doesn't work the way you think it will. Fear doesn't make you sharp and clever like it does in the movies. It makes you confused, disoriented. Your thoughts scatter like dropped marbles. You forget things you know. You doubt your own perceptions. And underneath all of that, running deeper than any conscious thought, is the primal understanding that you are prey in the presence of a predator. And every single thing you do from this moment forward will determine whether you survive. So I stood there, holding 2 mugs of tea, looking into the empty eyes of a stranger who was smiling at me with my son's smile, and I made a choice. I was going to play this smarter than he was, because I had one advantage he didn't know about. He thought I was a helpless old woman. He thought I was confused, fooled, easy, but I knew he was there, and he didn't know that I knew. "Here you go, sweetheart," I said, carrying one of the mugs toward him. My voice was steady, warm, maternal. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I walked slowly across my kitchen toward him and held out the tea. He took it, his fingers brushing mine for just a second. His hands were cold, rough. There was dirt under his fingernails. "Thanks," he said again. He was watching me carefully now, those flat eyes studying my face, looking for cracks in my performance, or just deciding what to do with me. I smiled and took a sip of my own tea, even though my throat was so tight I could barely swallow. The liquid burned going down, but the pain was good. It was real. It reminded me to stay present, stay focused. "You should get out of those wet clothes," I said, gesturing at his hoodie. "You'll catch cold. I think your father's old clothes are still in the guest room closet. They'd fit you." Arthur's clothes. Still hanging in the guest room because I couldn't bear to donate them, couldn't bear to erase that final evidence that he'd existed. His winter coat, his flannel shirts, the man's eyes flickered with something. Interest. Suspicion? "Nah, I'm good," he said. "This is fine." He took a sip of tea, grimaced slightly, too hot, and set the mug down on the counter. Then he reached up and pulled the hoodie off over his head. Underneath, he wore a plain grey t-shirt, dark with sweat and rain. His arms were lean and muscular, the kind of muscle you get from hard physical labor or other things. There were tattoos on his forearms, crude, faded things that looked like they'd been done in prison. One was a snake. The other was just words in a script too stylized for me to read from where I stood. And there, tucked into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back, I saw it. The handle of a gun, black, dull metal, barely visible under the hem of his t-shirt. But there, my heart stopped. Of course he had a gun. Of course he did. What had I been thinking? That this was just some desperate vagrant who'd wandered in out of the rain. This was planned. He'd watched the house. He'd planned his entrance. He knew Jason's habits, his appearance, his schedule. This was someone with an agenda. The question was, what did he want? If he wanted to rob me, he could have done it already. The good jewelry was upstairs in my bedroom. The TV was in the living room. There was maybe $300 cash in my purse by the front door. If he wanted to kill me, he could have done that too. I'd turned my back to him multiple times already. One shot, one swing, one attack, and I'd be dead. But he hadn't. He was waiting for something, playing along with this charade just as much as I was. But why? So, he said, leaning back against the counter, cradling the hot mug in both hands. More relaxed now. How have you been, Mum? Haven't seen you in a while. Time =, 0.6 S. He was improvising, filling space, trying to sound natural. Oh, you know me, I said lightly, moving to the table and sitting down in my usual chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the backyard. I needed to sit. My legs were shaking so badly I was afraid he'd notice. Same old routine? Reading, gardening when the weather cooperates. Your brother called last week. They're doing better. Little Emma hasn't had a seizure in 3 days. I watched him carefully. Jason would have lit up at that news, would have smiled, relieved, and probably said something about how terrified Mark must have been, how glad he was that his niece was improving. This man just nodded. That's good. That's real good. Wrong answer again. The rain continued to pound against the windows. The kitchen light flickered once, just once, and my stomach clenched. If the power went out, I would be in darkness with him. But the lights held. I glanced at my phone, still sitting on the table 3 feet away from me. The screen had gone dark. How long had it been since Jason's text? 3 minutes? 5? He would be worried when I didn't respond. He knew I always responded right away. He'd try calling, and when I didn't answer, the phone buzzed. Both of us looked at it. It was lighting up, vibrating against the wooden table. Jason's name and photo filling the screen. An incoming call. The man straightened up from the counter. His hand drifted toward his lower back, toward the gun. You gonna get that? He asked. His voice had changed, harder now, the pretense of friendliness evaporating. This was the moment, the precipice. Whatever happened in the next 30 seconds would determine everything. If I answered, and Jason heard something wrong in my voice, he might call the police. But then what? The man would hear me talking to Jason. He'd know I'd figured it out. He'd have no reason to keep pretending. If I didn't answer, Jason would definitely call the police. He'd tell them I'd texted him to be careful, then hadn't responded, then hadn't picked up his call. He'd tell them I lived alone. They'd send a squad car to check on me, but that would take time. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30. Could I stay alive that long? The phone kept buzzing, insistent, demanding. I started. Yeah, the man said. You should. He was watching me like a hawk now. All the casual pretense was gone. This was the real him, coiled, dangerous, ready. I reached out and picked up the phone. I didn't hit answer. I hit decline. Then I set the phone face down on the table and looked up at the man with the kind of bland, slightly annoyed expression that mothers have perfected over millennia. Telemarketer, I said. They've been calling all week trying to sell me supplemental insurance. Vultures. Can't even leave an old woman alone during dinner hours. I picked up my tea and took another sip, watching him over the rim of the mug. His hand relaxed, moved away from the gun. He bought it. Yeah, he said. They're the worst. And just like that, we were back in the game, back in the charade. 2 actors on a stage pretending to be mother and son, both knowing it was a lie, but neither willing to break character first. But I'd bought myself time. Jason would call back, and when I didn't answer again, he would call the police. I just had to keep this man calm, keep him believing I was fooled, until help arrived. The question was, could I do that? Could I sit here and have a conversation with a dangerous stranger who was pretending to be my child, knowing that at any moment he might decide the game was over and do whatever terrible thing he'd come here to do? I looked into those empty eyes and realized something. I didn't have a choice. Are you hungry for something more substantial? I asked, standing up from the table with my tea. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting him track every movement. No sudden gestures, no surprises. I could make you some eggs. Or there's leftover lasagna from Tuesday. Lasagna sounds good, he said. He was watching me closely, but he'd relaxed fractionally. Still alert, still dangerous, but no longer quite so tense. I opened the refrigerator, walking past him to do it, close enough that I could smell him now. Sweat, dirt, something sour and unwashed. Not the clean soap smell of my son, who showered every morning and did his laundry every Sunday like clockwork. Another difference, another confirmation. I pulled out the glass container of lasagna and set it on the counter, then grabbed a plate from the cabinet. I'll heat this up for you, I said. Just take a minute in the microwave. Thanks, Mum. Every time he called me that, something sharp twisted in my chest. This man had no right to use that word. No right to wear Jason's face and speak with that voice and stand in my kitchen like he belonged here. But I smiled. I nodded. I played my part. As the microwave hummed, I considered my options. The gun was the main problem. Even if I could somehow overpower him, which I couldn't, he could just shoot me. The knife block was 6 feet away, but I'd never reach it in time. The back door was locked. The front door was down the hallway and past him. I was trapped. Unless an idea was beginning to form in my mind. Dangerous, risky, but possible. The basement. We had a basement. A deep one. The kind they don't build anymore. With foundation walls made of stone and concrete, and a heavy oak door at the top of the stairs that Arthur had installed himself when we'd finished the space 30 years ago. He'd been so proud of that door. Solid wood, 2 inches thick, with 3 deadbolts, because we were going to keep important things down there. Tax records, family photos, the children's baby clothes and school projects. And we'd stored other things too. Tools, paint cans, the camping equipment we'd stopped using after the kids grew up. Boxes and boxes of accumulated life that I'd been meaning to sort through for years but never had. It was a big space, mostly empty now. And that door could hold. If I could get him down there and slam it shut, he couldn't get out. Those 3 deadbolts engaged from the outside. Once they were thrown, you'd need a battering ram or explosives to break through. But how could I get him down there? The microwave beeped. I pulled out the hot plate of lasagna, the ceramic burning my fingers even through the potholder, and set it on the table in front of where he'd been standing. Here you go, sweetheart, I said. Careful, it's hot. He sat down at the table, picked up the fork I'd set out, started eating. He ate like he'd been starving for days, shoveling food into his mouth, barely chewing. I watched him and felt a strange mix of revulsion and pity. Who was this man? What had happened to him that he was here, in my home, desperate enough to impersonate my son just for shelter and food? But pity was dangerous. Pity made you lower your guard. I leaned against the counter and sipped my tea, thinking. You know, I said conversationally, I was going to ask you for a favor before you go. He looked up, suspicious. Yeah? The basement. I've been meaning to organize it for months now. There are some heavy boxes down there. Your father's old law textbooks, believe it or not. He saved everything from his college days. I thought maybe you could help me move them. They're too heavy for me, but with both of us. Can't it wait? He asked, cutting me off. His tone was sharp, annoyed. Well, yes, of course, I said quickly, too quickly. I tried to sound disappointed, but accepting. I just thought while you were here. No, you're right. You're exhausted. It can wait. He went back to eating. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The plan wouldn't work. He was suspicious. He wasn't going to just follow me down into a dark basement. Why would he? It didn't make sense. Unless I made it make sense. Actually, I said, setting down my tea and moving toward the basement door, which was set into the wall between the kitchen and the hallway. You know what? Let me just check something. I think one of the boxes might have some photo albums in it. Remember that summer at Lake Michigan? The one where you caught that huge bass and your father was so proud he took 100 pictures? I was making it up. There was no bass, no photos, but the words tumbled out naturally. with the kind of specific detail that made lies believable. I want to show those to Emily when she visits next month, I continued, my hand on the basement doorknob. Let me just run down and see if I can spot which box they're in. Won't take a minute. I opened the door. The stairs descended into darkness. I hadn't turned on the light down there in weeks. The basement had a single bulb at the bottom of the stairs, controlled by a switch halfway down. "Mum, wait," he started, but I was already descending, my feet finding the familiar steps in the dark. This was the gamble. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. If he just let me go down alone, I'd be trapped in the basement with no exit and no way to call for help. But if he followed me— "Mum, hold on. You're going to fall in the dark," he called out, and I heard him stand up, heard the chair scrape against the floor. He was following me. I reached the light switch and flipped it on. The bare bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls and the scattered boxes that lined the perimeters of the space. I heard his footsteps on the stairs behind me, descending, following. My hand gripped the railing so hard my knuckles went white. "These stairs are tricky," I called up to him, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Arthur always meant to replace them. Be careful." He was halfway down now. I could see his shadow on the wall. I moved deeper into the basement, toward the back corner where we'd stacked the oldest boxes. I could hear him behind me, his heavy footsteps reaching the bottom stair. "I think the box is back here," I said, pointing vaguely at the far corner, "the one with the blue tape. Can you see it?" He moved past me, walking toward where I'd pointed, and as he did, I saw it. The gun in his waistband, plainly visible now as his t-shirt rode up slightly. This was it. The moment. I had maybe 3 seconds before he realized there was no box with blue tape, before he turned around and saw my face, and understood that I'd led him down here deliberately. 3 seconds to decide. I looked at the stairs behind me, at the heavy oak door at the top, standing open, at the 3 deadbolts on the outside that I'd thought were excessive when Arthur installed them, that I'd made fun of him for, calling him paranoid. Thank God for paranoid husbands. I looked at the man, this stranger, this predator, standing with his back to me, searching for a box that didn't exist, and I made my choice. "Actually," I said, my voice suddenly cold and hard and nothing like the soft maternal tone I'd been using, "I think I miscounted." He turned around, confused, and I ran, not toward him, toward the stairs. "Hey!" he shouted, but I was already moving, my 72-year-old legs pumping faster than they had in years, terror and adrenaline making me faster than I had any right to be. I hit the stairs and started climbing, my hands gripping the railing, pulling myself up 2 steps at a time. Behind me, I heard him curse, heard him start running. The stairs seemed to stretch forever. 10 steps, 12, 14, each one an eternity. His footsteps thundered behind me. He was faster, so much faster. I could hear him gaining on me, could feel him reaching out. 9 steps left, 8, 7. His hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked backward, hard, putting every ounce of strength I had into it. My heel connected with something. His face, his chest, I couldn't tell. And he lost his grip. "You bitch!" he snarled. 4 steps, 3, 2. I reached the top and threw myself through the doorway, spinning around, my hands finding the edge of the heavy oak door. He was right there, right behind me, his hand reaching for the doorframe, his face twisted with rage and something else. Shock, maybe, that the helpless old woman had just tricked him. I slammed the door with every bit of force I had. It was heavier than I remembered. Arthur had built it to last, and it moved slowly, ponderously, but it moved. The man's hand was in the doorway. The door caught it with a sickening crunch. He screamed, a howl of pain and fury, and jerked his hand back. The door slammed shut. My shaking hands found the first deadbolt and threw it. Thunk. The door shuddered as he hit it from the other side. The wood vibrated, but held. Second deadbolt. Thunk. "Open this fucking door!" He was screaming now, pounding on it. "Open it! You crazy bitch, open this door!" Third deadbolt. Thunk. The pounding continued. Harder now. He was throwing his whole body against it. The door shuddered, but held. I stepped back, my whole body shaking, my breath coming in gasps. He was trapped. I'd trapped him. "Open this door!" he was roaring. "I'll kill you! I'll fucking kill you when I get out of here!" But he wasn't getting out. That door was solid oak, 2 inches thick, with 3 deadbolts and a frame that Arthur had reinforced with steel brackets, because he'd been convinced that basements needed proper security. Thank God. Thank God for paranoid husbands. I walked slowly back to the kitchen, my legs barely holding me up. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving me cold and shaky and on the verge of collapse. But I couldn't collapse. Not yet. I picked up my phone from the table. Jason had called 3 more times. There were 2 texts. "Mum, answer your phone. Mum, I'm calling the police to check on you if you don't respond. Right now." I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911? What's your emergency? "There's a man in my house," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've trapped him in the basement. He has a gun. I need the police, and I need them now." The police arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire time, standing in my kitchen with a knife in my hand. The 10-inch chef's knife from the block, the one Arthur had given me, the one I'd thought about using earlier but hadn't. I didn't need it now, but holding it made me feel safer. The man in the basement had stopped screaming after about 5 minutes. Now he was just pounding on the door periodically, methodically, testing it. He wouldn't break through, but I wasn't taking chances. I'd also called Jason back. Mum, are you okay? I'm in a taxi. I'm almost there. The police are—" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I'd told him. "I'm perfectly fine. There's a man in the house, but he's locked in the basement. I'm safe. The police are coming." "What? What man? Mum, what?" "It's a long story. I'll tell you when you get here. But Jason? Yeah? We need a code word. A family code word. For emergencies." There was a pause. "Mum, what the hell happened? We'll talk about it. But we need a code word. Something only we would know. So if someone texts you pretending to be me or calls pretending to be you, we'll know." Another pause. Then, Okay, yeah. What about sunrise?" "Sunrise. Perfect. I love you, sweetheart." "I love you too, Mom. I'm almost there. Don't hang up. I'm not going anywhere." The police knocked on my front door at 10:07 p.m. I let them in. 4 officers, 2 male, 2 female, all young enough to be my grandchildren. They looked at me with professional concern and asked if I was injured. "No," I said. "But the man in my basement might be." I slammed his hand in the door. I led them to the basement door, told them about the gun, told them to be careful. They drew their weapons and opened the door slowly, methodically, professionally. "Police, come up the stairs with your hands visible. Now." There was silence for a long moment. Then I heard his voice, smaller now, defeated. "Don't shoot. I'm coming up. Don't shoot." They brought him up in handcuffs. His right hand was swelling, purple and red, possibly broken. His face was bruised where I'd kicked him. He looked at me as they led him past, those empty eyes trying to bore into me. I looked back at him steadily. "You underestimated me," I said quietly. They took him out to the patrol car. One of the officers stayed behind to take my statement. I told her everything. The doorbell, the text, the realization, the trap. She listened with wide eyes. "Ma'am," she said when I finished, "that was incredibly dangerous and incredibly brave." "It was survival," I corrected her. "There's a difference." Jason burst through the door 10 minutes later, his face pale with terror and relief. "Mum!" He hugged me so hard he lifted me off my feet, and for a moment I was hugging my baby boy again, the one I'd rocked to sleep 1,000 times, the one I'd protected from nightmares and skinned knees and playground bullies. But tonight, I'd protected him from something worse. I'd protected him from arriving home to find his mother dead. "I'm okay," I whispered into his shoulder. "I'm okay, sweetheart. We're both okay." They told me later that his name was Marcus Webb. He was a fugitive from a prison in Ohio, escaped 3 weeks earlier during a transport. He'd been living rough, hiding in the state forest that bordered our property, watching houses on the edge of town for opportunities. He'd seen Jason visit me, watched him from the woods, studied his appearance, his clothes, his habits. He'd been planning this for days. When the storm hit, he'd seen his chance. A vulnerable target, an easy entrance, food, shelter, maybe valuables to steal before moving on. He hadn't expected me to figure it out, and he definitely hadn't expected me to trap him. The detective who interviewed me the next day, a kind woman in her 50s named Chen, asked me how I'd stayed so calm. I didn't feel calm, I told her honestly. I was terrified every single second. But you didn't show it, she said. You played along. You made him think you believed him. That's not easy to do. I'm a mother, I said simply. We're good at pretending everything's fine when it's not. We do it all the time. She smiled at that. They found the gun in his waistband when they searched him, fully loaded, stolen from a home invasion 2 weeks earlier in Pennsylvania. He'd been planning to kill me. That's what the prosecutor told me later when they were building their case. He'd done it before, twice. Elderly women living alone, homes on the edges of towns, easy targets. I wasn't supposed to survive, but I had. Let me tell you the truth about survival. It's not about being stronger than the threat. It's not about being braver or more skilled or more prepared. It's about being smarter. It's about staying calm when every instinct screams at you to panic. It's about seeing the game and playing it better than your opponent plays it. That man came into my house thinking he had all the advantages. He was younger, stronger, armed, experienced at violence. But I had something he didn't. I knew he was there, and he didn't know that I knew. That was my weapon, the only weapon I needed. So here's what I want you to understand, what I need you to hear. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. That little voice in the back of your mind, the one that notices the details that don't quite fit. Listen to it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't dismiss it as paranoia or overreaction. I noticed the boots, the mud, the voice that wasn't quite right. My mind tried to explain it away, but my gut knew the truth. Your gut will know too. Stay calm. The moment you show fear, you lose your advantage. Predators are looking for weakness. If you can pretend everything's normal while you're screaming inside, you buy yourself time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to survive. And think strategically. You don't have to be stronger. You just have to be smarter. Find your advantages and use them. For me, it was my house, my basement, my paranoid husband's overbuilt door with its 3 deadbolts. For you, it might be something else, but it's there. You just have to see it. He wore my son's face, but he underestimated his mother. He thought I was just another helpless old woman, another easy victim, another statistic waiting to happen. But I'm not helpless. I've never been helpless. I'm a 72-year-old woman who survived cancer and loss and raising children in a world that wasn't always kind. I've buried people I loved and kept going. I've faced down fear more times than I can count. And when a monster walked into my house wearing my son's face, I faced down that fear too. I'm sharing this story with you because you need to hear it. Someone out there needs to know that survival is possible, that being old or alone or female doesn't make you weak, that your mind is the most powerful weapon you have. Share this video with your family, with your friends, with anyone who lives alone or anyone who might be vulnerable. And tell me in the comments, do you have a secret code word with your family for emergencies? Because after that night, Jason and I do sunrise. It's our code word. If he texts me and doesn't include it, I know something's wrong. If I text him and forget it, he knows to be careful. It's a simple thing, a tiny precaution, but simple things save lives. That's what I learned that night in my kitchen, standing face to face with a predator who thought he could fool me. You don't need to be strong to survive. You just need to be smart. And you need to trust yourself when everything inside you screams that something is wrong. Because sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that look like the people we love. And sometimes the greatest courage is in pretending you don't see the monster until you're ready to lock the door. It's been 6 months since that night. Marcus Webb is in prison now. He'll be there for the rest of his life. Thanks to the previous murders, they finally were able to connect to him after his capture. The detective, Chen, calls me sometimes to update me on the case. She says I'll probably have to testify at some point. I told her I'm ready. I'll look him in the eyes in court, the same way I looked at him in my kitchen, steady, unflinching, because I survived him. And survivors get to tell their stories. Jason visits more often now. He's anxious about me being alone, though he tries to hide it. He installed new locks on all my doors, as if the old ones weren't enough, as if 3 deadbolts on the basement door weren't already overkill. But I let him do it. It makes him feel better, and maybe it makes me feel better too. I've also started teaching self-defense classes at the community center on Tuesday evenings, not the physical kind. I'm not going to teach 70-year-olds how to throw punches, but the mental kind. Situational awareness. Trust your instincts. Have code words. Lock your doors. Think strategically. The classes are packed. Standing room only. Because everyone has that fear, don't they? The fear of the knock on the door. The stranger in the dark. The moment when you realize you've made a terrible mistake. But now they know what I know. That fear doesn't have to mean helplessness. I still live in the same house. Still sleep in the same bedroom. Still read in Arthur's chair by the window. But I'm different now. I know what I'm capable of. I know that when the worst moment of my life arrived, I didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I didn't become a victim. I became a survivor. And that's what I want you to be too. The rain has started again tonight. It's been 6 months to the day, and the weather is exactly the same. That violent, hammering rain that turns the world dark and dangerous. I'm sitting in my chair with my book and my tea, and when the storm rattles my windows, I don't flinch. Because I know something now that I didn't know before. I'm not afraid of storms anymore. I'm not afraid of knocks on the door. I'm not afraid of the dark, or the silence, or living alone in this big house. Because I've faced the worst thing I could imagine, and I won. Not with strength, not with violence, with my mind, with my will, with my refusal to be the victim he thought I was. That's power. That's survival. And if it ever happens again, if another monster knocks on my door wearing a familiar face, I'll know exactly what to do. I'll smile. I'll pretend. I'll play the game. And I'll win. Because I'm not just a mother. I'm not just an elderly woman living alone. I'm a survivor. And survivors don't go down without a fight. Before I go, I want to leave you with one final thought. The world is full of predators, people who look for weakness, people who target the vulnerable. But the world is also full of survivors, people who refuse to be victims, people who fight back with whatever weapons they have, even if that weapon is just their mind and their will to live. You are stronger than you think you are. You are smarter than they expect you to be. And when the moment comes, and I pray it never does, but if it does, you will know what to do. Trust yourself, stay calm, and lock the damn door. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring enough to hear how an old woman survived the night a monster came into her house. Share this video. Protect your family. Create your code words. Trust your instincts. And remember, the scariest moment of your life doesn't have to be your last. It can be the moment you discover just how strong you really are. I'm living proof. And now, so are you. Stay safe out there. And always, always, check who's at the door before you open it, even if they look like someone you love, especially if they look like someone you love, because sometimes the monsters wear the most familiar faces, and sometimes grandmothers are more dangerous than anyone expects. Good night, lock your doors, and never underestimate an old woman with something to protect. Survival isn't about strength, it's about being smart enough to win the game. And I won. He's in prison. And I'm still here, in my chair, with my tea and my book, and my memories of Arthur, and my Tuesday evening self-defense classes, and my son who visits more often now, and my code word that will keep us all safe. Sunrise. Remember that. And stay alive out there. The world needs more survivors, and fewer victims. Be smart. Be careful. Be ready. And if you ever find yourself standing in your kitchen face to face with a monster who underestimated you, show them what happens when they mess with the wrong grandmother. Lock that door and tell your story, just like I told mine.